Good morning. Welcome to Interesting Times. It's Lee again, and today I'm going to talk about why, or at least to the best of my understanding as to why. Why me? Why not like woe is me, but when you start having these interactions and you see these things in the sky, and you start experiencing something that you don't understand, and you start doing research, you start reading, you start looking. I prefer to go get the actual printed text. I It's not that I don't trust things that are on the internet or your phone or all that, but sometimes material has a way to be distorted or changed, or I'm not really sure. Um, it I like the idea to be able to go to the book and look and see. And as far as I can tell, this is one of the most open secrets out there. There is an infinite amount of validating UFO material that says, hey, this is a thing. And it exists and it has existed. I've got books from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, up to current, that if you're just going on an evidence-based approach as to whether or not you believe, the evidence is already there. It's just one of those things where it's like, well, people just don't believe. And I flat out was in that category. I was like, no, that's not a thing. And plus, since I'd been in the Air Force, I was like I would know. I mean, obviously, I wasn't part of the group of people that needed to know if there was such a group. But from what I can understand from the congressional testimonies and everything that's going on now, there are people that are in the know. So when this happened, and I started thinking like, why me? And there is speculation. Like Gary Nolan had mentioned something about maybe a difference in capacity in certain components of the prefrontal cortex or a ganglion, I believe. I'm not really sure. I'll probably do an episode on that one just by itself because I just mentioned that off of memory, but that one actually warrants its own discussion because he gets into the neurological differences that may present and the ability to see those type of things. But in this particular instance, for me, as I started reading through this and coming up with an idea of what this is a thing that exists. This is a thing that's going on around us, and we just don't have any awareness of it. I did start noticing a parallel between near-death experiences and UFOs. At least people that had a near-death experience seeing UFOs, or people that had seen UFOs having had a near-death experience. It seems like there was an overlap, and that's where I'll bring my personal account into this. One of the things that I'm kind of struggling with this is how honest am I going to be with the internet, the group of people I don't know. Well, my intention for this is I'm not here to make money or change ideas or to debate you or say you're wrong. I'm not here to make money. I'm not here to do any of that. If any money is generated off of this, it will be channeled appropriately to areas where it'll do good. My intention is to get this information out here. There's been numerous times where I've talked to people one-on-one, which is what I prefer to do, is just talk to people, where the conversation will remind somebody of something that occurred, or it'll trigger like, well, now I want to look at this, and now I want to look at that. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. It's just to bring that forth. So for me personally, so one, I have a constitution that is kind of like no other. I can eat copious amounts of food, drink copious amounts of alcohol. When I was in the military, anybody who's been in the military knows that drinking is a pastime of preference for most people. And I actually wasn't a drinker before I went in the military. I partied like some people do. You know, you go out to a party and you have some drinks, but I wasn't like I didn't drink. But when I went to the Air Force, that's when it occurred to me that my constitution was maybe a little bit different than other people's, because if my friends would need to have like a drink, I wouldn't feel anything until I at least got to 5 or 6. So I wasn't looking at it like the multiplication of drinks is the multiplication of damage on my body. I just looked at it like, well, it takes me this to feel it. And honestly, I never really got fall down drunk, like tons of alcohol. Well, I was in the military for a long time, and I drank all the time in the military. And when I got out, I continued to drink, but it was just because that's what I did. Like it wasn't. I never showed up to work drunk. I never was drunk around my family. I just drank. It just took a lot of alcohol to give me a buzz, and the Constitution thing is weird because I've also been in situations in my life where I've been in motorcycle accidents, car accidents, really severe accidents. I just walked away from it. I mean, like no bones, no broken bones, no anything like that. I've never had a surgery. And it got to the point where the alcohol poisoned my body to a toxic level where everything just shut down. A matter of fact, I believe it was at the end of 2015, and I had just turned yellow. I didn't think that I was like gonna die. Like nothing in my body let me know. I didn't feel like it, but I ended up going to the doctor here outside of a main city, and they were like, "Yo, we're gonna go and put you in an ambulance. We're taking you in town." And I ended up being in the hospital for about a month. I had liver and renal failure completely. I lost over 100 pounds. I got really, really, really sick. I spent about 3 weeks on, I don't think it was intentionally a hospice ward. I think that's just where they had room. But I was kind of laying there with people as they were transitioning out of this existence. And it was weird because I was about as sick as I think you could be. They sent in doctors. I had a doctor from Spain, and it was crazy because he's like, "Hey, we got something experimental over there that probably help you, but you can't get that here." And I was like, "Well, that's not great." And I remember talking to my doctor about this because it was to the point where my creatinine levels were to the point where my kidneys were not getting better. My liver had completely shut down. My body just kind of went into a free fall. My mind didn't. Like my mind felt like I was fine. I didn't really think that I was going to die, but it did get to a point where it was a Sunday, and my doctor came up from a golf game, and he basically told me on Monday if my levels of creatinine and everything that indicates continued organ failure, he's like, we're gonna have to put you on a transplant list for liver and kidneys. And we were just sitting there talking, and he had mentioned something. And I honestly don't remember what the medication was, but he mentioned something about a medication that the side effect, it wasn't intended to open up kidneys, but during its trials, they had found out that it had opened kidneys in a couple of kidney failure patients. And so he's like, "Do you want to try a shot of that?" And I was like, "Well, in for a penny, in for a pound, why not?" And then I spent the rest of that week kind of reading medical journals about what was happening, the damage that had been occurred, the probability of whether or not I would make it out. Because that seemed pretty, everything, it was like I was fine, and then one day everything was dire. And they came and they gave me that shot. It was Sunday. Monday, my creatinine levels hadn't gotten better, but for the first time they stalled. And then the next day they went down and they went down. And then the process of recovery after that was probably about 18 months. When I got out, I was out of the hospital, and for the first 4 months, it still looked like I wasn't going to make it. When you're that sick, you develop ascites where your body doesn't get rid of the fluid, it just builds up. And I actually had a giant distended belly, and I would have to go to the doctor, and they call it getting tapped, but they actually just like release the valve. They just plug in and pull out all the fluid and do it again. But the doctor was like, "Yo, if we have to keep doing this, you still need to be on a transplant list. Like your stuff's not working." And this was about the time where I also realized after I got out of the hospital that like if you go to the doctor or if you go to the grocery store to buy anything, you can't like I had an 800 milligram a day sodium restriction without debating anything else about food health or whatever. Processed foods, GMOs, no debate. Let's just say you're setting your diet for 800 milligrams of sodium. You don't want to exceed that a day. Well, anything that's packaged in a grocery store, which means anything outside of the produce aisle, that's going to be no, because the sodium is going to be enough to preserve that. So I had to eat basically out of the produce section, and I started realizing, well, there's chemicals and compounds and stuff on that. So I basically just found I lived for about 18 months on just protein. Like I would take fish, eggs, and meat, no salt, no pepper, no anything, barely sear it, barely cook the meat, and then eat it. Water, milk, and produce. That was it. Like no, nothing else. Like that was the entirety of my diet. I was kind of like, my point of view was like, if my body was separate from me, which at the time I didn't consider it to be so, I was like, and it was just a wounded animal. Well, I would be trying to shove processed food and all these things. I was like, let me take care of my body like it's a wounded animal and see what I can do to help it, because I guess I fucked this guy up, you know. And I never really felt like I was checking out. I felt embarrassed and I felt disgusted with myself, and I felt like I let my family down and all that, because I didn't know that the adding the alcohol, it tore the body apart even worse. But again, doing studies about stuff, it occurred to me when I was reading through this, it just basically boils down to alcohol is poison, and it destroys your body every time you do it. We just like the side effects. And so I was just like, well, and it wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm gonna have a problem not drinking. I was just like, this is a poison. This almost killed my body. So I haven't had a drink since 15, I guess. I don't know, sometime thereabouts. Whenever I got sick, I was like, well, that shit's not working for me, so I just haven't had a drink. So I've made it through all the current presidential nonsense on both sides without having a drink. So pat on my back. But back to getting the body healthy. So while I was going through all this, one of the books that I had found was an old homesteading book from the 1800s, and it had a lot of information in it, like things that we used to do when you couldn't just go to the doctor. Like, you know, if you had a homestead in the 1800s, and it might be a 2 or 3 day ride to the doctor, so you could just go there. So they had a lot more understanding of the natural benefits of stuff. For example, ascites was one of the things that I was having issues with. It was noted in the book that back in the day, they used to use radishes as a natural diuretic to help keep the water off your system. So I started incorporating radishes into my diet. It kept the water off my system. And day by day, I got better. It took me a while to get up to my just normal weight. But I just lived like that for a while, and I'm considering that to be a near-death experience because of the closeness to death that my doctors told me I was at. Like, I didn't think that I was going to die. I had a conversation with my doctor later where they were doing a study to try to figure out why I lived. Because he was like, yeah, we didn't, you were really rough. Your odds weren't good. And I was like, well, you didn't ever act like that. He's like, I couldn't act like that. You were the patient. And he's like, but it was real bad. And I was like, but for me, it wasn't though. Like, there was something in my head. I just had a knowingness that that wasn't my time, but I needed to do better. Um, that to me, I'm considering a near-death experience. Like, I didn't prolonged near-death experience because it was a period of time. Now, the funny thing after that is when I did get out of the hospital, this was the first example of something like anything in the woo-woo field that happened when I got out of the hospital. Again, I didn't have like visions of light or going to the tunnel or anything like that. But for about 2 years after the whole incident, I have what I can only describe as a paramagnetic electrical response. Like, automatic faucets would not recognize me. Going through automatic doors would not recognize me. I went through several phones, burning out batteries. I worked at a company at the time for the first 14 months. They sent me 3 laptops. I could put my hand near a screen and there would be like that degouging type effect. Now, I don't know what in the world was on about that. There are some other things that go along with that were really weird, but there was a very obvious change in my magnetic field that was engaged physically in this reality. Now that's faded off. Like, it's not like that now, which I almost kind of indicate is like, it might be like an indicator of health. But so as I was researching through all of this stuff, I think one of the first books that I found that kind of really touched on the topic of near-death experiences and anything like that in this world was this book, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. this is fantastic. I'm going to do a whole just episode that's just this book recommendation. But he had a near-death experience and he expounded on it. And some of the things that he talked about in this book, which I believe it was 90, might have been 90, I thought it was 96. Oh, 92. So this is 92. It's definitely older, but it feels like the rest of us, the rest of society and technology is coming up to these. And if you'll remember during the David Grush congressional testimony, he wasn't saying that we live in a holographic nature, but when one of the senators pressed him, well, we couldn't have anybody here from somewhere else because of physics, time, space, whatever. This is what David Grush uses as an example, this theory, not this book. The holographic universe theory, it predates the 90s. It goes back into the 60s, but in this book, he does talk about the near-death experiences and kind of not necessarily a similarity to, but he does talk about his own personal experiences. And then other books, American Cosmic, she makes reference to similarities with near-death experiences and UFOs. And I actually found, and I'm going to include a link in below, I found a study. It looked like it was an older study, but it basically talks about near-death experiences and UFOs, the impact on people's like their lives, their outlook, the positivity, finding of spirituality, whatever it is. And it's funny because on the UFO category, everything is amplified. It's just more than the near-death experience. Like if you have a near-death experience, you're probably going to have a series of events that happen afterwards. But it seems like the UFO thing is another form of, like if you would look at a near-death experience and you attribute it to expanding your consciousness and ability to perceive, it seems like UFO experiences do the same thing. And so one of the things I'm looking for is the similarities between the two. And then also if they're correlative. And I don't necessarily know that they are, but they just seem to kind of lockstep together. So at this point, I would like to go ahead and just, I lost my track of thought. Well, and anyway, because that's really the crux of the video. I kind of went on for a little bit longer than I should have, just kind of rambling about it. But this video was specifically just to talk about why I think that I am seeing things. And the catalyst for me was nearly dying. Now, there were a lot of things that happened in the years before now, that I just couldn't explain. But when I get information now, I look back and I was like, oh, well, that was probably attributed with this. So if you've seen anything in the sky, or you've had near-death experiences, or, you're wondering why you're seeing things, that may be a potentiality. So at this point, I'd just like to say thank you for taking a look. I'm going to include links below for the studies. I recommend Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, for a number of reasons, and I will do a breakdown fully on that book in the future. And this will be the end of me just talking about stuff. The plan moving forward is I'm developing a filming schedule to talk about stuff, specifically current events. I do have a video series planned. It's going to be approximately 10 to 12 videos. The Saul Foundation is a group of scientists. Diana Pasalka is part of that. Jacques Vallée. David Grush gave a little bit of a speaker. He spoke there about his stuff. But it's basically last November, a group of like the Avengers of scientists came together to talk about this. And they were all like, hey, the government's not pushing this information out. They're not getting it out there. What can we do? So they got together, and each one of them had about half an hour, 45 minutes of presentation where they talked about stuff within their field that's associated to this. So I'm going to break down those videos, and they're not necessarily academic, but maybe can make it a little bit concise, like this is what they were saying, this is the points. Some of them are entertaining, some of them are really factual based, but I want to start with, hey, this is where we are right now. This is the group of scientists. This is the information that they're wanting to bring to the public. This isn't me saying it. It's not me going by my feelings, because I know there's going to be a lot of people like, he just says he feels a lot. Yeah, that's part of it. Like after this happens, you get a knowingness about things when you just know when things are right and when they're wrong. and there's communication that comes from other places. And it's really startling when that starts to happen as well. So I know that there's a lot of things going on that we can't really explain, but I feel like that base of information from the Sol Foundation would be a good starting point to talk about that. And then also, just as news develops, I will have like either a weekly roundup or the current week's news in UAP, because honestly, it, sometimes it's so much information that you can't really get all of it. So I'll try to do weekly summaries, and I am going to uh, develop a schedule that is multiple videos a week. I did go ahead and add a sign up here. I've got, that's my email, interesting times, uappodcast@gmail.com. If you do have any questions for me, or would like a topic to be discussed, or you think that I got something wrong, that's what this is about. You know, like I'd like to have a conversation because we just need to understand this better. The phenomena, whatever's going on around us, we need to better. And I'm hoping by taking my research of this to a group forum where I'm bringing it out, that'll help us develop a better understanding for it. And I'm hoping by people doing this and having the conversation that we as humanity have a better understanding of this, because I still think it's crazy that we are fighting over like nation states and skin color and all of the crazy, oh, you're from here, I'm from here, and it's so inconsequential. And I have a feeling that when we realize that it's like, I guess I'm gonna have to move this. When we realize that we're all earthlings, every single damn one of us, all of us, we're all the same, we're earthlings. And some of the documents, one of the terminologies that didn't make it through to the final legislation, but the term hierarchy of beings was in there. Now you can extrapolate from that what you want, but when we realize that we're earthlings together and there's others, then maybe that we will quit infighting. And I think when we quit infighting and develop a better understanding as a collective consciousness of people, that's when we're going to expand. And it feels like we're on the very front side of this starting to happen. Because I've talked to people that are just as weird as me, where it's like, it just came out of the blue. And it does feel like it happens like that. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate every single person that's taken a second to look in. And like I said, feel free to reach out to me directly. The intention of this is to continue the conversation, and I will continue to try to bring forth any information, hopefully in a somewhat humorous fashion, that will be beneficial to you in understanding all of this. Thank you, and I wish you all a good day.